the newsagents.
I'm not sure the Chief Whip is. Right, we now come to Prime Minister's questions.
That is the sound of a bench of Labour MPs taking the piss, for want of a better phrase, because every time that a Tory came into the chamber for House of Commons for Prime Minister's questions, they looked to see which side of the bench they were going to sit at. In other words, were they about to defect to become Labour MPs?
Yeah, but so far, it's only 2:30 in the afternoon, no one has yet defected. Plenty of rumours, but no defections. We're going to come to that a little later in the podcast. But we're going to be asking first about the right to protest and a new government report that is going to come out next week. We have an exclusive interview with the author of it. Welcome to the Newsagents. It's John.
It's Emily.
And today we're going to look at protest and whether the laws as they currently stand in our liberal democracy are good enough to deal with people's right to protest, to express their unhappiness about the way things are working, or whether something has fundamentally shifted in the way our democracy works, and therefore much more draconian measures are needed to be put in place so that a kind of open functioning democracy happens, and whether the new threat is coming from the far left, which has been underestimated, as opposed to the far right.
Or as well as the far right. And this all comes with the publication of a report next week by John Woodcock, former Labour MP, now sits in the House of Lords as Lord Walney. He has written 100,000 words and he's come up with 40 recommendations, which he's going to put before Parliament on Monday. And some of the things he's recommending is not, he's going to tell us, about who protests, but about how you protest. In other words, where, how close to facilities, whether you need exclusion zones, whether you need buffers or designated perimeters, and the kind of actions or activities that protesters are using currently, whether or not they should face more severe criminal charges. And I guess this comes after the introduction of Suella Braverman's new law last year, which has made protesting more difficult. It has tried to protect more public spaces, and you could argue more of the public from protesters. And it has, in many ways, angered those who want to be out on the streets, getting closer to their targets in the ways that they think will actually start to change hearts and minds.
And of course, you end up with a fundamental question. If you start prescribing groups, proscribing
as in
groups,
making them banned,
then are you at the same time chipping away at what is at the heart of your liberal democracy, which is the right to protest? Well, as you said, Emily, the report is out next week, but in his first interview since the report was completed, the author, John Woodcock, Lord Walney, is with us in the studio now. And is it Lord Walney or John Woodcock?
John, please.
Hello,
John.
Hi, how are you? Thanks very much for being with us.
Good to be here.
So take us through what this report is going to recommend.
Sure. I was asked to look across the piece at the far right, the state of the far right in the UK, but also, and quite relatively unusually, the far left, how it operates, the level of influence that it has, and as part of that, looking at the makeup of our protest laws, where the balance ought to lie, of which has obviously been a really significant focus for a number of years, actually, with the legislation that the government has brought through, but in particular since the Gaza protests. And overall, my conclusion through this is that we have, understandably, as a country, and law enforcement agencies have been focused on Islamist violent terrorism and the violent threat from the far right, because it is indeed greater than the far left. But we have relatively ignored the level of damage which anti-democratic groups can do to our parliamentary democracy and to the major institutions that sustain the UK.
And you're saying that that's coming from the left in a way that has not been appreciated before.
The far left, and I think it's really important that it just is in the way as we distinguish between the mainstream, largely Conservative Party right and the far right and the nationalist racist groups, there is also a huge distinction between the left, the tradition that I am from as a former Labour MP and an activist, and the far extreme left, who basically do not believe in the democratic settlement that we have in the country and seek to wish to change it in a range of ways.
John, who set the parameters for this? I guess
I've been doing it for so long, it's slightly embarrassing.
Well, what I'm asking in a sense is that we have a government now who I think is pretty widely recognised to have shifted itself to the right. So isn't there the danger that there is a lot more on the left, maybe the far left, that the government sees as more threatening because of where it is now?
But a really important conclusion in looking at this is that whatever your view of changes that ought to happen in this country, and I would like to see a lot change. This is not my government. I've been pleased to serve as an independent advisor, but my sympathies on a broad range of things lie as they did when I was a Labour MP. But that if you want to change, you need to actually do that through our parliamentary democracy. And I think we've got ourselves into a strange place. And I think particularly probably people of my background on the left. I grew up in the tradition of protest and marches, like so many of us in the Labour Party. My mum took me on C&D marches in the 1980s when I was a kid. But we've got to a place sometimes where we think that actually it is the highly disruptive protest which is the epitome of democracy, when actually that can often be an expression of force. It's maybe not violent force in bashing someone over the head, but is showing a physical presence that tries to short circuit our democracy, when actually there ought to be no short circuit, no quick route through that is not just trying to change people's minds through the ballot box.
I just think it would be really helpful if you set out one or two examples of what it is you mean, where you think, actually, that's the wrong side of the line.
Well, Just Stop Oil, for example, there's been a lot of controversy about the public order, the changes to the Public Order Act that have come in recent legislation. One of the things that this government has brought in is a much clearer offence to block roads, for example. Now, there were credible voices on the centre and the left that say, no, this is a standard part of civic disruption. It's part of our tradition as a country. We shouldn't be cracking down on this stuff. I take a really different view. And actually, I've welcomed the fact that the police now have the powers and are generally using them to remove protesters from the roads, because actually that is about, rather than trying to change people's minds, it's about saying, we are going to not let you go about your business until you listen to us.
So just clarify for us what this means then, because Just Stop Oil protesters, we know, have been taken off to the police station. They have been arrested. They have been cleared from the road. So your recommendation would mean what? Well,
I've welcomed the change of the law in terms of criminalising that more effectively. But the problem that we have got is that with Just Stop Oil on the climate change front, and with the organisation like or grouping that call themselves Palestine Action, which are the very extreme end of the Gaza protests, who are basically going round defence industry sites in the UK, committing criminal sabotage, smashing them up, disrupting workers. Both of those things are against the law, but they are not proving a deterrent at all to the organisers.
They're not allowed to exist as organisations?
Well, that's my recommendation. Yes.
And do you put Sisters Uncut in that briefing as well? That was the organisation set up in the wake of the Sarah Everard's murder against violence against women and girls.
ultimately, it would not be for me to decide. I'm giving.
Well, you just said those the first two are.
No, I understand. So I'm giving you examples of the kind of behaviour of organisations that, for me, I think we should meet the threshold. If this happens, there'll need to be a process that's led by the Home Secretary. I don't think I would put sisters uncut in that, but
so it's not. I mean, what I'm trying to work out is it the mechanism that they use to protest,
exactly,
or is it whether you feel that you're sympathetic with the cause?
No, that's a really good question, and it must not. And that's one of the big, my big conclusion through that we have got to be much better on all sides, government, opposition, all of us, at divorcing sympathy for a cause with the means at which you try to change people's minds. Because what is happening at the moment is many people are saying, well, climate change is so important, and I believe in it. I'm one of the people who believes there is a climate emergency, and therefore these kind of things, it's kind of inevitable, and you've got to really kind of go with them and excuse it. And I think this is a really dangerous place for us to be as a country, because there have been examples of environmental terrorism mostly in other countries, and there could well be in future, as the sense of radicalisation, there could be people who are considering actual terrorist acts in the name of the environment. Every terrorist, no matter what their cause, feels that they have not only a justification but a responsibility to act in the way that they did. I just want to get to the
bottom of this, though, because you know how you feel about Just Stop Oil. You know how you feel about Palestine Action. Both of those could be in the sort of, let's say, prescribed element. Peter, Action Against the Cruelty to Animals, has been very, out there on the edge of things. I mean, how many of these organisations would you put in that same bracket?
Well, I think you would need... what I want to happen is that there becomes a framework and an ability for there to be a proper academic assessment led probably by the Home Office, but by the Home Secretary, but challengeable on whether these are groups that commit serious criminal offences systematically to try and get their way. Because you're right to say that they are these acts are crimes, and people will get charged. But frankly, it is not proving a deterrent to them doing it. And we can look at the ways in which it's maybe not a deterrent. The Criminal Prosecution Service is not functioning as it is. Sometimes these things are taking years to come to trial. But if you could actually stop the organisers from being able to call meetings, raise money.
Okay, so let's say
if you're prescribing an organisation, on this, and you start saying, right, okay, Just Stop Oil is and using terrorist-style legislation to prescribe organisations, isn't a little part of our democracy dying along the way when an environmental group is described as a terrorist organisation, or Palestine Action is described as a terrorist group?
They are not being described as a terrorist organisation. This is important to see, and I understand where the confusion and blurring can come. But the problem at the moment is you have to meet the terrorism bar for any prescription, and organisations do not, and therefore there is nothing that falls below this.
And what is the urgency of now on this, given that if you look back at the history of protest over 20, 30, 40, 50 years, Grosvenor Square, 68, you can go through a whole series of things. The poll tax riots and the anti-poll tax campaign with the riots around Trafalgar Square led to the scrapping of the poll tax. Fall of Thatcher. John Major comes in and says we're going to get rid of the poll tax. I mean, protest can be effective.
It can be, but as I say, I think we have, and actually many parliamentarians, perhaps myself included in the past, have actually been too blasé and not doing enough to actually promote and defend and protect our parliamentary democracy. And just look actually what is happening to our democracy at the moment. The level of threat which many members of parliament are facing on an individual level is frightening. I think there are understandably not publicly divulged figures on this, but those figures
actually they were divulged. We talked to the head of anti-terror in the studio, and he told us exactly the number of MPs that have faced death threats in the last year and the number of letters that have come in. So we know that 23 people are facing, I think he called them life threats.
Fine, good. But I think actually there is probably still a level of under-reporting in people that are picking stuff up. But however you look at this, that threat level is through two of my colleagues have been, and one of whom was a good friend, Joe Cox, have been murdered in the line of duty in recent years. A third, Rosie Cooper, had an advanced assassination attempt thwarted against her. Stephen Timms was stabbed in. So there is a real level of threat, and so us being able to draw the line really clearly that actually what you need to do is to engage in a parliamentary process through legitimate means, because we are lucky in this country to have all of these channels available to us to try to change the mind of the public and parliamentarians. And
John, can I just go back to the mechanism, because I think this is really interesting. In your world, Palestine Action, Just Stop Oil, I'll put in a special group, right? But if I'm with Palestine Action, I can just invent a new name. I can call it Action for Palestine. I can call it Stopping Oil, right? And then suddenly I'm back and I can do exactly what I want. I'm a protester, right? So I'm not looking at the rights and wrongs of exactly which groups are. I'm just going out because I believe my imperative is to change the world, right? So how are you ever going to stop an organisation when it can just find a new iteration?
There is no magic bullet to this, and yes, indeed, and what you've seen in terror organisations is that they do try to morph, but it's an effective tool because it does inhibit the ability of people to organise. It will never be the final thing. You will always have to keep chasing it. But if it starts to become that people, at the moment, Palestine Action have been openly, they were live tweeting the occupation and damage that they were causing to a Leicester defence factory last week. So there is not close to being a level of deterrent inhibition.
So what are you saying? They're not allowed to be tweeting outside a defence factory, or what's happening to the defence factory?
Well, they weren't just stood there tweeting outside the defence factory. They were tweeting, "Come and join our." Essentially, criminal sabotage to smash this place up. So there is a level of network of organisation and ability to fundraise, which I think you could inhibit through some kind of prohibition restriction order. Now, the detail of that would have to be carefully calibrated. And no one is saying, I'm certainly not saying that it should equate to terrorism legislation. I would imagine the tariffs for terrorist offences would rightly remain significantly higher.
I mean, come on, you would hope,
sure,
right? But you would hope that we're locking up terrorists, not people who are protesting against climate change. Wouldn't you? No, I mean, okay.
Well, we're talking about Palestine Action. I mean, the damage that they are doing to defence sites, the way that they are. You could use the word terrorising workers.
So they are terrorists in your head?
No, I'm not saying that. But there is a level of criminal damage and disruption that we should not be relaxed about. And I think it's easy to fall into it's only about climate change. We all agree with tackling climate change, and so let's not bother. I mean, if you got to the Magna Carta, the activists had got to the Magna Carta last week and managed to damage it in the name of, I think, climate change. We'll be saying, but it's climate
two women
change.
In their 80s.
Well, it wouldn't not necessarily,
So you've got sort of Hamas in one cell and the two ladies in their 80s in the other.
Well, I mean, if we could do more to lock Hamas up, that would be also a good thing. But it's not okay to commit criminal damage. I mean, particularly on when you're looking at sort of priceless artifacts like that in the name of whatever. And that's my point. You can agree with a cause passionately, but I want to try to make a contribution to reshaping this debate to say, if you believe in a cause, try and change more people's minds through elected politics rather than thinking the route to do this is to smash something up or set something on fire.
Which was ever thus, though.
Yeah. John, can I just ask you whether you're the right person to be advancing these arguments, given that you're a former chair of Labour Friends of Israel and Palestine Action, and I'm just going to quote them here, and I would like to hear your response. They say you're the current chair of the Defence Purpose Coalition, and you're getting funding from the Israel lobby.
Yeah, I think when any organisation starts talking about an Israel lobby, they need to look at their own slide into anti-Semitism. That is a textbook example of the kind of anti-Semitism that mainstream organisations have tried to move away from in recent years. My wider background is on the record, and I hope that I have brought a level of objectivity, certainly of detail, into looking at this issue. I've produced, you'll see, a very long, extensive report, and it will be for others to make a judgment as to whether the analysis that I have put forward and the judgments that I have reached are worthy of taking forward. And it's worth saying as well that although I've said that the actions of Palestine Action are reprehensible, and I like to think there would be a wide level of agreement, whatever your perspective on the current Gaza conflict, that the criminal damage that they are doing to defence factories is not acceptable. But whatever my perspective on that, I'm putting forward a mechanism that a future Home Secretary would have at his power to be able to make their own judgment of any organisation and could be challenged on it. So it's not me that would be making the judgment.
But as a perception, John, I mean, you are the former chair of Labour Friends of Israel. Do you not see that, how this is going to come across to supporters of Palestinian liberation?
Well, I mean, I don't think I would go into this thinking I was going to make friends with people who were part of that extreme end of the pro-Palestine movement anyway. But I think the public and lawmakers are going to have to look at this report in the round. It's a big report. It's 100,000 words. It's got a lot of. It's got a lot of.
Talk us through this. What is the Defence Purpose Coalition? We've been honestly scratching our heads and calling around trying to work out what the Defence Purpose Coalition is or does. You're the current chair of that as well.
The Purpose Coalition is an organisation of purpose-led groups, including has been some defence-related companies who value the contribution that they make to the UK economy, and we should all do that.
But the point you make about that, look, you are an impartial voice on this. I just think that the perception would be that people would beg to differ, given you kind of have a role with the defence industry. You have been a part of Labour Friends of Israel. I just think it's worth addressing.
Look, everyone comes to particular roles with a particular background, of course, and my background on this has been very clear. I was a Labour MP. I left the Labour Party during the Jeremy Corbyn era, and so all of that is set out as a matter of public record. I hope that people will be able to look at this document. I've put in a great deal of time to it. As I say, it's 100,000 words. It contains 40 recommendations. I think it does quite a detailed sweep of the current situation across the far right and the far left. And I hope people will come to a view as to whether the recommendations that I put forward are...
Do you know the government is? Do you know that they're going to take on the 40?
I know that they're looking at it carefully. My guess is that next week they won't say yes, we accept all of it, because it goes through across a number of different government departments. But it's been in draft form and being circulated through Whitehall amongst officials for a number of months, and I've had some good engagement and help refine the. So
and with Labour, presumably.
Yeah, well, I've spoken to. I've spoken to senior Labour people.
Keir?
It's been Keir's team and Yvette. And Yvette's team, which has been really encouraging, and I hope that there can be as broad as possible a consensus on taking action on the wider challenge of being able to protect our democracy from challenge.
John, just another thing. You talk about how you were a member of the Labour, you were a kind of Labour MP. You resigned over Jeremy Corbyn. We've had 2 defections in the past couple of weeks of Tories crossing the floor. You haven't rejoined Labour, have you?
No.
Why not?
Well, I mean, part of me really does miss it, and I miss my friend. My friends are still my friends, but I look at this and I wish them well. I want them to succeed. I took a view when I came into the House of Lords, and slightly unusual routes. I didn't really anticipate this as part of my career path as a sort of young Labour activist.
Because you were appointed by Boris Johnson.
I was appointed by Boris Johnson. I mean, if someone had said to me back when I was like part of the Labour attack research unit before the 2005 election, in 15 years' time, you are going to be made a member of the House of Lords, 2, by a Conservative Prime Minister, and 3, that Prime Minister is Boris Johnson. None of those things would have seen remotely. All of them would have seen absurd.
So does that inhibit you rejoining the Labour Party? The fact that you were appointed by Boris Johnson?
I got sidetracked. So when I came in as an independent, I then made a choice to become a crossbench peer, which I kind of hadn't really realised, which was bad of me. But the crossbenchers is not just a term for anyone who isn't in a political party. It is a club in its own right, and it is a club of parliamentarians who are avowedly not party political. And when I came in, the now wonderful man, Lord Judge, who's recently passed away, who's a convener, he was a little bit grumpy. And he said, well, we don't really kind of want you people here, but here you are. If you really do want to be part of our crossbenchers, you have to show that you've renounced party politics, and you can come back again in a year. So Gisela Stewart and I did that, and so it was an active thing to say, okay, no, we're done, we're retired from party politics. So
what do you make of the ones who have crossed the floor? I mean, Natalie Elphicke most recently.
Well, I mean, I guess good on the Labour Party for that. I mean, I'm
wise move.
For the Labour Party, absolutely. And who was saying? Who did I see yesterday say it is uniquely the Labour Party Labour Party activists who could actually gain an extraordinary new MP like that and then make it a problem for themselves rather than for the Tories from whom those people were fleeing. So
the Tories sound rather happy, to be fair, that she's left.
I mean, I think if you're in a position that you're losing your MPs, I mean, you can put a brave face on it, and there can be a level of kind of gallows humour is probably too strong, but you know what I mean. It's a curious fit. I'd be really interested to talk to her, but from the Labour Party point of view, yeah, good on them.
John Woodcock, great to have you with us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank
you.
So as we said at the very beginning, there was a sort of weight of expectation on Keir Starmer, who, frankly, did not pull off a hat-trick, did not manage to find a third Tory to cross the floor at this particular PMQs. But it hasn't, of course, stopped the rumours. And we're trying to work out whether the rumours have all been fuelled by Tories who are trying to sort of now, set up the expectation so that it fails, or whether there is just a pause. And I heard from somebody very close to the Labour leader last night who said that the message they were getting was, not sure I can handle another one just yet. And I said, does that mean that they all found the Natalie Elphicke thing a bit too much after last? It wasn't, an unmitigated success. And the response I got back was, just yet is the key bit. In other words, watch this space. There are names, there are rumours, there are memes about who could be next to cross the floor, but it probably won't happen for another 10 days. Although, we should just say, we are hearing about this big extravaganza meeting tomorrow.
Yeah, so there's meant to be some event involving Keir Starmer tomorrow. We think in Essex. Apparently large numbers of the shadow cabinet don't know details about it.
This all came from, we should say, story broken by Aubrey Allegretti of the Times.
Yeah, and so there is something happening tomorrow. There is going to be a surprise appearance of someone. Now, we don't know whether it's going to be a defecting MP or some business
An
guru,
Essex celebrity.
Or maybe it's just Keir Starmer, the glitz and the glamour of Keir Starmer alone. I think, when you raise that question, is it the Tories setting up for failure or is it whatever? I kind of think it could possibly be both, in the sense that, look, the Tories cannot be joking about MPs defecting, because every defection gives another raft of terrible headlines for Rishi Sunak. And if he's wanting to show leadership and I'm Mr. Tough, and we had his speech on Monday which he said, I am Mr. Defence of this nation, if he's kind of losing...
He's got a leaky ship.
If he's got a leaky ship and people... and it's worth underlining again just how unusual it is for MPs to cross the floor of the Commons to go from one party to another.
When you saw that Robert Buckland story, the former Justice Secretary, saying that Natalie Elphicke had essentially tried to pressurise him to step in when her husband was facing charges over sexual abuse, there was a ripple going round that this was not just Robert Buckland kind of going off on one and sort of doing this to clear his part in it, but rather was trying to send out a message to anyone else that's thinking of defecting. The doors will open, we will come after you, we will get all the skeletons out of your closet, you will not have a good time. I wonder if it was a shot across the bows to other MPs who are thinking of doing the same thing.
Well, I think that's a very good point. And I think that, Robert Buckland, who sort of obviously tipped off the Sunday Times, has not done any other interviews since then. But I know he's telling friends, when asked about this, who do you believe? Do you believe me, former Justice Secretary, or do you believe her? And I think that it is exactly that sort of operation as you describe. The dogs of hell will be unleashed on you if you dare, if you consider. Think twice. Just think what we might have in the dossier against you that's been compiled over the years.
It's the verbal tarantula of one Sir Gavin.
Yeah, exactly, Sir Gavin Williamson. I'm glad we've mentioned him. But I think that the Conservatives are deeply worried about it. Labour would love to have another, but it's highly unusual. And so, the rumour mill is doing what the rumour mill does. It's, getting us all excited about what might happen tomorrow. So watch this space on the podcast. We'll be back with that tomorrow. We don't normally do breaking news on the newsagents, but while we have been recording today's episode, a piece of news that I just don't think we can ignore has come in. And it is that the Prime Minister of Slovakia, a controversial figure who is kind of seen as being a populist, slightly pro-Moscow, keen on a pan-Slavic coalition, and in a very different place to his predecessor as Prime Minister, has been shot and wounded. We don't know how seriously. He has been taken to hospital. But this is something that could have a destabilising effect when already we have on this podcast been talking about what is happening in Georgia, what is happening in Ukraine, what is happening in other areas where Russia is trying to influence. And here we've seen a pro-Moscow politician, the Prime Minister of Slovakia, having been shot on the streets in a town about 150 kilometres from the capital, Bratislava.
Yeah, and the caveat to all this should be that it only happened minutes ago. The trouble with trying to cover breaking news in an environment where it's now 3:15 in the afternoon, this could be outdated and we could learn much more about a completely different story. But at the moment, we are watching very closely those clashes between the pro-Russia voices and the protesters. And in fact, our dear Lewis has headed off to Tbilisi in Georgia to go and look at some of the clashes that are happening on the streets outside the Parliament with this new vote, the foreign influence vote it's called, which is all about whether Russia essentially can influence who says what, which journalists can come into the country, which visas are allowed, which organisations and NGOs are allowed in Georgia. And he'll be reporting for us on the podcast tomorrow.
We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.